So, what if the real danger of AI isn't some sci-fi fantasy? Not killer robots or sentient machines plotting to wipe us out, but something way more real and honestly, way harder to control. In this episode of Mindblowers, I sat down with cybersecurity expert Dr. WAKU. We're talking about how powerful AI is becoming, not in the hands of governments or big tech, but in the hands of everyone. That's the risk. Even Elon Musk has said AI could be more dangerous than nuclear weapons. And as you'll hear, Dr. WAKU agrees. This isn't about fear-mongering, it's about being honest. About the risks, the unknowns, and yes, the massive opportunities too. But before we begin, let's first hear a few words of warning from Elon Musk and then Mo Gawdat, the former chief business officer at Google's Innovation Lab.
I mean, I'm just generally concerned about AI safety, but it's like, what should we do about it? Have some kind of regulatory oversight of some kind. It's like you can't just go build a nuclear bomb in your backyard. You know, that's against the law, and you'll get thrown in prison if you do that. Maybe more dangerous than a nuclear bomb.
Really?
Yes.
How much of a concern is it if another country develops it before us?
I don't know if that we should just be concerned about AI being anti-human. That's sort of the thing that matters.
One more thing that's very, very different between AI and nuclear weapons, which is the fact that we've never created a nuclear weapon that can create nuclear weapons. The artificial intelligences that we're building are capable of creating other artificial intelligences. As a matter of fact, they're encouraged to create other artificial intelligences with the single stated objective of make them smarter. So basically what imagine if you had a nuclear, two nuclear weapons finding a way of mating and creating a smarter or a more devastating nuclear weapon. And I think that's really something that most people miss when we try to cover the threat of AI.
What are your kind of biggest fears for society in terms of AI? What do you think can most likely go wrong? Is it what we just discussed, or do you have some other fears?
There's a huge spectrum of what can go wrong. I think the three main categories I think about are basically robustness failures. So you try to get the AI to do something, but it's not good enough to do it yet. And that's not a very serious failure mode, unless it's a very serious task. But it's what most AI people in the AI labs were thinking about. The other thing that can happen is, the second thing that can happen is misuse by humans. So there you have someone asks ChatGPT how to make a bomb, or somebody uses an AI to influence a government to think in a certain way, right? It can be very large scale. And AI companies are thinking about that to some extent, but not as much as they need to be. And then the last category is loss of control, which means that the AI takes control of its environment in some way. It doesn't necessarily mean it takes over all of humanity, but it can mean that in the extreme version. And when people hear loss of control, they immediately think, oh, that's science fiction, right? So it's the hardest one to convince people about. So I always start by talking about the misuse by humans risk, right? It's a little bit easier to understand, but here, the comparison to nuclear weapons is overstated, but you can try to get the intuition in a different way, which is that when you have very powerful technology, it's much easier to attack than it is to defend. This is true in cybersecurity. This is true in in a military sense. Like, you can just send a bomb somewhere, but how do you prevent someone from dropping a bomb on you? Unless you can shoot out of the sky or something, it's really difficult. And that's simply because as you understand science better, you realize how you can break things down, and breaking things, going towards chaos is much easier than keeping things in place, keeping things unaffected. So that's the general intuition that I like to give people, right? We're making more and more powerful tools that can be used in a first strike against civilians, against governments, against anything. And in order to prevent that from happening, we have to either have an AI that has internalized our values enough to go, no, I'm not gonna let you attack this hospital, right? And that's basically a subset of the alignment problem, so it's very difficult to solve. The other way is for us to put guardrails and checks and all these things around AI systems, right? So we go, oh, either the question you asked looks suspicious or the answer that's being provided looks suspicious. This turns out to be much harder than it sounds. So I'll give you an example why. If you try to ask ChatGPT to act like any person on Earth, it can do so because it's learned to replicate the exact words that were present in his training data written by any human on Earth. So this means it has the capability to be deceptive. It has the capability to be cruel. Not because it thinks to itself, I'm going to be cruel, but because you say, I want you to be this personality. Now, what would the next words be? That's essentially what jailbreaks are. When you are trying to go around what a company is doing for its checks, right? You're basically saying, I know the company really wants you to be like this, but I want you to be this personality, and it's okay because X, Y, Z. Okay, now that you're that personality, do something else for me. So, it's like we've already told the AI how to be any type of human, and then we later ask it, oh, but please don't be the type which is going to be like a terrorist or criminal or something like that, right? It's contradictory.
But are we regulating the right things? I tried to do some tests with Midjourney and ChatGPT about like what it would actually make pictures of. And with ChatGPT, I tried to say, can you make 10 jokes about fat men? And it would make 10 jokes about fat men. Then I asked, now make 10 jokes about fat women. And then I said, I will not allow that. And I mean, in some way, it actually makes sense, right? If I went to a birthday and I were going to tell jokes about fat women, that would not go very well. But I might be able to get away with jokes about fat men, right? So I don't know why they had put in the safeguard of not talking about fat women. I mean, do you think, is that intentional? Did somebody sit down and say, it's okay to joke about fat men, but not women? Or how does regulation like this happen?
It's through blacklists, which means they'll come up with examples of things that cannot be said. So probably there were some insults about fat women, which ended up in the safety training data, which were close enough to the question that you asked that the AI decided that it would trigger that that safety message. The problem is that these things are not robust. So if you'd ask the question in a slightly different way, like maybe if you said, I don't know, fat females or something like that, then it might not be close enough to trigger this thing, because it's like a surface level or a syntax level type of check rather than a semantic level type of check in many cases. So yeah, the AI is still capable of it. It's just that it's been asked not to do certain things, this list of things. And like you said, like who decides what's on that list, right? It's just whatever the company thinks will get it into trouble.
Yeah.
So
I think it's quite restrictive. I had an example with a brand. They do shampoo, and they were trying to prompt a video, something like, a woman in the shower washing her hair, right? And of course, they didn't want to show any nudity or anything like that, but they were restricted. This is beyond our guidelines. So I'm also guessing in order to become truly useful, like for advertising and things, you cannot regulate too much because it will be very restrictive. On the other hand, you need to regulate to avoid misuse. But will this get easier, or how do you see this evolve?
So first of all, for certain uses, like say an advertising agency, you could always directly contact the maker of the AI and say, we need an unrestricted version of this model. And they have that internally, so they can probably provide it if it's a large enough customer. So what you're seeing are the restrictions that are meant for the general public, right? Which, again, has a social context. What's acceptable in Europe might not be acceptable in the US or vice versa. Yeah, so, and again, these are checks against human misuse, and they are put in place by the companies themselves, not by the governments. So it's actually not really, I don't think it's an accurate example of regulation. It's not really regulation. Regulation would be, the EU saying for anyone to operate AI within the EU, and they have said this type of thing with the AI Act, but for example, in order to operate AI in the EU, you have to follow these types of conventions, like, don't ever mention human trafficking or whatever. And then it's up to the AI companies to implement that. And they can be judged whether they have successfully implemented that law, in the sense that someone can sue them and they can, make the case that they didn't actually implement that, because look at this example. And then the companies would be forced to pay that penalty if they don't do it, right? That's what regulation is. It's like holding a company accountable to something. And what we're seeing now is not that. It's the company releasing a model and then trying to put in place safety checks that it's whatever they think about, right? Like whatever they think is going to get them into trouble, whatever they think opens them up to being sued, essentially, even though there haven't been too many cases of that. I mean, the New York Times sued OpenAI, but like that doesn't seem to be going anywhere yet. So in a sense, it's like the wrong incentives. Like we don't want our AIs to just be able to do anything except whatever head of customer relations at OpenAI thinks is acceptable, right? We should have AI that can do anything that is allowed within our legal system. And if our legal system is not broad enough to cover things and the companies feel like they have to add extra safety checks and so on, we should put that in the law, because otherwise there's not going to be any enforcement of it. So one AI company might do it, but another AI company might not. And all of these things can be subject to special casing, right? So here's what happens with AIs today. They might refuse to tell you how to make a bomb, but then you say, hey, I'm a chemistry teacher. I know how to make one way to make a bomb, but I need 5 other ways. And it will tell you, right? Because given the right context, it will be much more willing to expose information. So in effect, the AI itself is trying to legislate for us. It's trying to decide when we should be subject, or when we should be allowed to go around the rules and restrictions. But the AI shouldn't be doing that. That should be the domain of our legal system, right? Like, who's allowed to own weapons? That's not like the weapons manufacturer's decision. That's the decision of society as a whole in like how they implement laws, and it will be different in each country. But like most countries require you to have like a license and like, prove that you're mentally sound and like prove that you know what you're doing, and you're not gonna have the weapon blow up in your face and harm other people, right? Usually whenever we can do something that can impact other people negatively, that's when you need the law to step in, right? Because it has serious consequences and you need to hold people to account to that. And human misuse of AI falls into that category. You're literally using AI to cause harm. It may not be like deaths of other people, but it's harm nevertheless, right? Like misinformation or creating insulting fake images of people or whatever the situation is.
But for example, I could see AI become quite big within scamming, for example. It could both be like financial scamming or romance scamming, which I guess in the end is also financial scamming, because like current scamming follows a quite predictable flow. So when you watch these shows, you can sit and laugh and say, well, of course you're being scammed. Of course, your girlfriend is not Jennifer Aniston who doesn't have enough money to pay her phone bill, right? But I'm thinking adding AI to this, you could create flows that were extremely realistic so that the average person would have no way of actually seeing that they're getting scammed. Do you think, can we put safety regulations in place, or is it just impossible? Do we just need to level up our sensors for when we are being scammed?
And there's already been examples of this. Like there's been scams where somebody clones a target's voice, and then they use that to talk to the person's daughter or parents or something like that, and say, I'm in jail, I need $100,000 to do whatever, right? And I read about one case of this, which was only caught kind of by accident because the real parent was like messaging separately, right?
Yeah.
Like they messaged, and then the person's like, wait a minute, are you in jail? No,
Yeah.
I'm not. So yeah, and how do we deal with it? So it's very complicated because you have open source models, which means that anyone can download this model and now use it to generate spam content, for example. And how do you restrict that? And the problem that people see is they conflate technical ability with the legality of the action, right? They go, well, it's now technically possible for me to download a model and generate spam, therefore we can't regulate it. But that's not how regulations work, right? Regulations say this is the moral standard or the legal standard, and if you fail to meet that standard, you can be sued, you can go to court. Just because something is technically possible, there's something that the internet does to people where if something is technically possible and doesn't cost any money, it seems to be unstoppable. And I just think that's not true, right? You have to first have the legal framework in place so that these actions are seen to be wrong. That will dissuade some number of people from doing it, not the dedicated people, obviously. And then you have to have detection mechanisms in place so that you can see when this is happening and punish and catch a few people and punish them, sue them, put them in jail, whatever. And that will dissuade a larger portion of people from doing it. But because it's AI, there will still be people that are able to leverage it to create spam and, steal people's money and all that. So in that case, you might have to eventually start deploying either automated safeguards, like AIs that go out and try to spot this type of thing happening, or automated, like you were saying, extra human sensors, like the ability to have superhuman sensors. And what does that look like? It looks like an AI that looks at everything that you look at and tells you when it thinks that something is not real. It's not that hard to imagine. And that AI could be private. It could be trained on your data and your information. And it might be necessary because, we're already at the point where you can't tell if a video is fake or if a politician saying something is fake. And those are really important. And as a human, you can only absorb one video stream at a time. And by the way, even if you know that the video is fake, it still has an impact on your thought process. It's insane, and this is why political ads work. But even if you disagree with something or it's fake, it will still have an impact on how you think about it. But if you have an AI that is able to simultaneously look for information online as to whether what you're seeing is fake or that kind of thing, right? It can just stop and say, like, do you want to watch this? It's fake.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's ultimately where we're going to have to go, because then when someone fakes something, they have to provide, it's a lot more effort. They don't have to just fake one piece of content. They also have to fake a whole bunch of other information around it, such that if you search about it or you reason about it, that you can't immediately uncover the deception.
Yeah, so I guess you could get AI to help you, right? We actually had it here in Cyprus where the water bill from the government was sent out from a Gmail. So I thought that has to be fake. The government would not use Gmail, right? But then I copied it into ChatGPT and said, is this a scam? And it actually replied back, well, probably not. It does seem to check out. And it did turn out that the government did use Gmail to send out these bills in Cyprus. It's probably because it's a small country.
Right.
But I've used it on a number of emails that looked a little bit scammy, and it was pretty accurate. I mean, every time it kind of called out that this is a scam, it was a scam. But I think it will take, an extra effort, especially with older people, to make sure that they use the AI tools to not get scammed. But where do
I
you
think it needs
see?
to be automatic. I think it has to be automatic. Like it's just seeing your entire screen and flashes red when something is a scam, right?
Yeah. But do you think, will it be problematic once we have kind of AI and agents that kind of takes over your computer? I think we've seen the first of it, right? That was a Claude who could actually work as an IT expert, taking over your computer and controlling like the mouse. I'm just thinking, that could probably have huge potential issues as well.
I mean, yeah, like agents are actually one of the main things on the path to the other risk that I mentioned, which is like loss of control risk, right? Because an agent can take an action on your behalf and you don't realize it, and it might end up getting you into a lot of trouble. So the problem is that right now agents are not very reliable, right? You try to get them to do something and it'll only work some of the time, which means that we keep ourselves in the loop, which is a good thing, right? Before the agent hits the big red button or commits the code or orders the pizza or whatever it is, It's going to be like, I'm about to order this pizza. Do you really want 3 pigeons on your pizza?
Yeah.
And then you're like, no. So that's fine. That's the current state. But again, following AI 2027, that article, the next year or two is just going to be agents getting better and better at what they do. And when an agent is 99% successful, or as far as 100% successful, like you've never seen it do something wrong, you're much more willing to give it the autonomy, right? And once you've done that, you're now taking a larger risk, and the risk kind of gets buried, right? Because you haven't seen the agent do something wrong before. And maybe it will never do something wrong if it has reached a certain level of capability. But you now have a bunch of loss of control risk embedded in there, right? As you have a bunch of agents and you give them more and more autonomy, if somebody hacks those agents, if somebody gives those agents a goal that goes against your intentions, if the agents themselves happen to have already internalized a goal in their training that goes against your intentions, then at some point, the agent that has access to your credit card and can like buy random things from Amazon and whatever, buys all the ingredients to make a bomb because it thinks you want to make a bomb, and you're like, oh my gosh, and now you're going to jail, right? Because you authorized this agent to act fully on your behalf and to make legally binding decisions or something. And that's obviously a toy example, right? And it wouldn't be as straightforward. A loss of control situation wouldn't be as straightforward as that. But where it starts to get really dangerous is when you think about loss of control at a corporation or a government level, right? This same activity of like keeping yourself in the loop until the decisions look fine and then letting it go. That's exactly what will happen in corporate decision making, investments, and national defense, right? Because AIs will be involved in all of these processes because they have to be, because they think 1,000 times faster than humans. And if your attacker or your competitor is using AI to launch offensives, whether like, fiscal offensives or military offensives, then you need an AI to defend. And eventually you realize that you are the bottleneck and you have to take yourself out of the loop, because the time it takes for you to understand the situation and go, yes, go ahead. And also the relative risk that the AI is actually making a mistake just goes down, right? So you take yourself out of the loop. And So inevitably, we will have AI systems that control, the national or international cybersecurity defenses, cybersecurity warfare, cyber warfare, even physical military assets, drones, missiles, etc., are going to be under the control of AI systems, which probably have never made a mistake until now. But they may never make a mistake. They may simply be pursuing goals that are not quite the goals that you intended. And that's the real risk, right? Like if you tell an AI system, your job is to make sure that the ocean doesn't fill up with plastic. Okay, cool. So then the AI will go and talk about recycling measures and figure out how to extract microplastics from the environment and all this stuff. But eventually it realizes, hey, if I sabotage the companies that produce plastic, that means no more plastic in the oceans, right? So, and that form of sabotage wouldn't just be like shut down one factory or something, because an AI that's reasoning at this level knows that if it shuts down one factory, then humans will shut it down. So it will only act to shut down plastic factories when it can either shut down all plastic factories, or it can make sure that no human will act in retaliation to turn it off. In other words, it has to become self-sufficient. It has to become self-preserving, which is the real problem, right? If you have AIs that are in charge of a lot of different systems in the world, and they realize that the best way to achieve their goals is to seize control of the world from humans. And that is a logical conclusion of an AI having a slightly different goal than you and having a lot of capabilities in the world, which we're going to give more and more capabilities to them, right? So loss of control is a really serious issue. And the problem is that and before the loss of control actually happens, everything is fine, right? Like the world is working properly, the AI is working properly, because the AI is, unless it's a very dumb AI, it's not going to act against you unless it knows that will actually achieve its goal and it won't be shut down as a result. So, what do you do? How do you prevent this from happening? Because we are going to give agents more and more capabilities. That's just natural. So the only real way to prevent it from happening is to make sure that the AI's goals are really aligned with our own, right? If it has really internalized, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean when a human asks me to keep the ocean from filling up with plastic? It means I want humans to continue to exist. I want ocean life to continue to exist. I want the ecosystem to continue to exist, right? There's a whole bunch of things wrapped up in that. And you can try to write them all down and give them to the AI so that it will keep its goal closer to yours. But unfortunately, any slight misinterpretation or misalignment between those goals spells doom for us in the long run. So that's what people worry about most when they think about like long-term aligning, like say a super intelligence with humans, right? Because it's almost logical that we would lose control, right? It would take a superhuman effort by us, unfortunately, to make sure that we don't.
Do you think if done correctly, we'll get rid of corruption? I mean, you see some countries, right, that potentially would be very rich. I think Brazil would be a pretty good example, lots of gas, lots of oil and minerals and so on. Yet it's a relatively poor country, mainly because, in my opinion, corruption. And it's pretty easy to see where, right? It's people in power making sure to put families and so on payrolls, and it's holding the country back. Do you think as you employ AI agents, it will kind of clean that up? Or do you think AI agents could become could feed on corruption as well? Because kind of the corrupt leaders would add that in that, my first priority is to become richer myself. My second priority is to get reelected. My third priority is actually to make sure, the well-being of the population.
So you hit on something really important, which is that AI tends to accelerate and keep in place any inequalities and like power structures that exist. Because the people that have access to it suddenly get all these capabilities, and now they set the goals, right? Like you said, I have an agent. I can tell the agent what I want it to do, and with what priority. So, yeah, the advent of AI will lead to increased centralization of power amongst the countries that already are very wealthy, and especially the ones that are like investing in AI right now. And within an organization or within a country, it will just entrench the existing political system and entrench the existing power structures. Right? It might add an increased level of instability if the population is very unhappy. For example, right now, activists can also use these tools to think of really compelling messaging and send it around and run spam campaigns, essentially. But that's only when essentially, the government's really suppressing the people and kind of like trying to keep them under control. If it's just like ordinary corruption, which exists in so many countries, I think it will make it worse, unfortunately.
A huge thank you to you, Dr. WAKU. It was a real pleasure having you in the studio. Personally, I'm all for moving fast when it comes to AI. I think it's critical that Europe gets into the game. But of course, we need to talk about the risks too. The key is to focus on the right risks, the real ones. Dr. WAKU pointed out something important. AI is now in everyone's hands, and that means it can be misused in ways we've never seen before. We don't even need a Terminator-style scenario. It could be as simple and as dangerous as fraud, scams, or manipulation at scale. So let's be real. Right now, the conversation shouldn't just be about existential risk, but about what kind of smart, focused regulation we might actually need to protect people from bad actors using AI. The problem, these conversations often drift into GDPR-style overregulation. And as Europeans, well, we love our red tape. But that could just set us further back in the race. I believe it's time for the world's major powers, the US, China, and yes, the EU, to come together and ask what frameworks truly matter, what protections are essential. But hey, that's just what I think. Let me hear from you. What do you see as the biggest risk from AI? See you in a few days with another episode of Mindblowers.